I have to admit, when I saw the coordinates for today's deep dive, I was a little confused.
Oh,
I
yeah.
pulled it up on the map, and I was expecting, I don't know, the Nile Delta, maybe the Tigris and Euphrates, somewhere dusty and, famous.
Right. One of the usual suspects.
Exactly. But instead, we are looking at a valley in central Bosnia.
It's not the first place that pops into your head when you think cradle of civilization, is it?
Not even the top 10. And yet, looking at this stack of research articles on the Sarajevo Museum collection, excavation reports from a place called Okolište, papers on bone technology, it seems like we've been looking in the wrong direction.
Or at least we've been missing a huge piece of the puzzle.
A really big piece.
We definitely have. We're going to be talking about a time period roughly 7,000 years ago. So put yourself in, say, 5200 BC.
Okay, 5200 BC. In my head, that era in Europe involves, like, people in furs, shivering in caves, maybe banging two rocks together if they're feeling particularly ambitious.
That is the stereotype, the primitive Stone Age. But while most of Europe was indeed living in very small, scattered groups, the people in this specific valley in Bosnia were doing something completely different.
Wow, different.
They were building what was effectively a megalopolis.
A megalopolis in the Stone Age. That sounds like a contradiction.
In the context of the time, yes. We are talking about the Butmir culture, and specifically a site called Okolište. And it challenges almost everything we thought we knew about that transition from hunting and gathering to settled life.
Right, because we usually think of that as a really small, quiet affair.
Exactly. A family plants some wheat, builds a hut, maybe domesticates a goat. End of story.
But you're saying this wasn't just a hut and a goat.
No, this was a society that rivals the famous sites of the Near East places like Satalayuk or Jericho in terms of complexity, artistic achievement, and just sheer scale.
Oh.
But for some reason, outside of specialized archaeology circles, almost nobody knows about it.
It's a lost metropolis.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
A lost metropolis that was discovered by complete accident, flourished for centuries, and then, well, mysteriously collapsed.
I love an accidental discovery. It's always someone tripping over a root or digging a well. How did we find this place?
Well, to understand the discovery, you have to transport yourself back to the late 19th century, 1893 to be exact.
Okay, 1893. The Austro-Hungarian Empire is in charge of Bosnia.
Right, and the Austro-Hungarians were very big on modernization, bureaucracy, infrastructure, education. They were building things.
I see.
And they decided that what the district of Ilja, near Sarajevo, really needed was an agricultural college.
A farming school.
Exactly. They wanted to teach the locals modern farming techniques. So the authorities picked a nice, fertile plot of land in an area called Butmir. It's flat, near the river, perfect for demonstration fields.
I feel like I know where this is going. This is too perfect.
So they send out the construction crews. They start digging the foundations for this school. And almost immediately, the shovels hit something that isn't dirt.
Not rocks.
Not just rocks. They hit a massive, dense layer of stuff. Stone tools, flint knives, and thousands upon thousands of pottery shards.
Wow.
And not just crude clay pots, but beautiful, intricate ceramics. Really high-quality stuff.
So they're trying to build a school to teach farming.
Yeah.
And they accidentally dig up the people who basically invented farming in that region 7,000 years ago.
It is a wonderful historical irony, isn't it?
Yeah.
And credit where it's due. The Austro-Hungarian administration didn't just pave over it. They realized this was something significant.
That's good to hear.
They called in the experts from the National Museum in Sarajevo. Two men in particular became the faces of this discovery, Wenceslaus Radimski and Franz Fiala.
Radimski and Fiala, they sound like a detective duo from an old movie.
They essentially were. They led the excavations from 1893 to 1896. And they didn't just find a few artifacts. They uncovered an entire settlement. They found 90 distinct dugouts or hollows in the ground.
Dugouts, like foxholes, people living in holes.
That was the initial interpretation. They thought they were looking at pit dwellings. Basically, people living in holes in the ground with a roof thrown over the top.
Okay.
It fit the bias of the time, that prehistoric people were primitive. But as we'll see later, they were actually looking at the basements or the foundations of much more complex structures.
Ah, I see. So they were underestimating them from the very beginning.
Completely. But even with that misunderstanding, the sheer volume of material was shocking.
How shocking. Was this just a local curiosity, or did it make waves?
Oh, no. This was a global event.
Yeah.
To give you a sense of the scale, in August 1894, just a year after the discovery, they organized the International Congress of Archaeology and Anthropology specifically to discuss this site.
An entire conference for one site.
An entire international conference. They held it right there in Sarajevo.
Wait, they brought the international scientific community to Sarajevo in 1894. That's not like hopping on a Zoom call.
No.
That's a steam train journey. That's an expedition.
Exactly. It attracted the leading minds of Europe. Rudolf Virchow was there. He's considered the father of modern pathology and a huge figure in anthropology.
So the big guns showed up.
The biggest. They all traveled to Bosnia because the Butmir finds were rewriting the map of European prehistory. They were seeing art and craftsmanship that they thought shouldn't exist in the Balkans at that time.
So we've established that this was a big deal, but let's talk about where this is actually happening. You mentioned a valley.
The Visoko Basin. If you look at a topographic map, it's really distinct. It's what geographers call a polche.
A polche, I've heard that term, but refresh my memory.
It's a geological depression, a large, flat-floored basin in a karst landscape. Think of it like a flat-bottom bowl.
Okay.
The Visoko Basin is relatively small, only about 110 square kilometers. But it's incredibly fertile. The river brings down all this rich sediment.
Okay, so a fertile bowl sounds like a nice place to set up shop.
It is, but there's a catch. It's tightly encircled by mountains, Miocene mountains that shoot up to 1,000 meters high. So you have this lush, flat land, but you are walled in on all sides.
It sounds cozy. Or maybe claustrophobic.
Contained is probably the best word. And that containment is crucial to understanding the Butmir culture. Because usually in the Neolithic, if your village gets too big or you have an argument with your neighbor, you just move.
Right, you just walk a few miles and start a new settlement.
You pack up, walk 10 miles down the river, and start a new village. There was plenty of empty space.
But here you can't really do that. You hit a mountain wall.
Exactly. The geography forces density. It forces people to live together in a way they didn't have to in other parts of Europe. And it forces you to face the math of survival.
The math.
Calories and acres. We can actually reconstruct their nutritional needs. Based on what we know about Neolithic diets, a human being needs about 0.3 hectares of arable land to grow enough grain wheat, barley, lentils to survive for a year.
0.3 hectares. Okay. That doesn't sound like an impossible amount of land.
It's manageable. But remember, they weren't just eating bread. Our sources call them cattle kings. The archaeological record shows they were heavily reliant on cows.
Oh.
And cows are expensive, ecologically speaking. To keep a cow in that environment, you need about 10 hectares of pasture per animal.
Whoa, 10 hectares per cow. That's a huge difference.
It's a massive footprint. So if you look at the population estimates for the biggest site, Okolište, which we think hit somewhere between 1,000 and 3,500 people.
Wait, back up. 3,500 people in one settlement in the Stone Age.
Yes, at its peak.
That sounds huge. I mean, what's a typical Neolithic village? 50 people.
Maybe 100 if that's a big one. 3,500 is a town. It's a city by any prehistoric standard.
So if you run the numbers on that.
You run the numbers, 3,500 people, plus their herds of cattle. And the Visoko Basin literally isn't big enough to feed them. The math doesn't work if they stay in the valley.
So they would starve. There just wasn't enough land.
They would, unless they had a system. This implies that 7,000 years ago, they were already practicing a very complex form of land management. We believe they were using transhumance.
Transhumance. That's
Yeah.
moving the herds.
Yeah.
Right. Seasonally.
Right. It's a seasonal movement. In the summer, when the valley is being used for crops, you take the cattle up into the high mountains surrounding the basin.
Ah, to the pastures up there.
You graze them on the alpine pastures. Then, in the winter, when the crops are harvested and the mountains are covered in snow, you bring them back down into the valley.
That sounds simple enough, but if you think about it, that requires a lot of coordination. You can't just have everyone wandering around the mountains whenever they feel like it.
Exactly. Who goes? Who stays behind to tend the crops?
I know.
Who protects the herd from wolves or bears up in the mountains? Who owns which cow?
You need rules.
You can't have a society this dense and this complex without rules. Transhumance implies organization. It implies that this wasn't just a mob of people, it was a structured society.
So let's zoom in on the city itself. You mentioned Okolište. Is that the same place Radimski and Fiala found in 1893?
No, Okolište is a different site within the same culture, but discovered much later. It was heavily excavated much more recently, between 2002 and 2008.
Ah, so with modern techniques.
Exactly. And because it was excavated recently, we have much better data. We have geomagnetic surveys, radiocarbon dating, precise botanical analysis. a whole new toolkit.
Okay, paint the picture for me. I'm walking into Okolište in 5200 BC. What am I seeing?
You're seeing a boom town. At its peak, the settlement covered 7.5 hectares.
I always struggle to visualize hectares. Give me a comparison.
Think of a standard international rugby field. It's about 1 hectare. So imagine 7 or 8 rugby fields packed together, completely filled with housing.
Okay, that's a big footprint. That's a serious settlement.
And it is dense. We estimate about 200 houses standing at the same time. And this is the part that blows my mind. They weren't just scattered randomly like you'd throw dice on a table.
They weren't.
They were organized.
Organized how?
The geomagnetic surveys, which basically let us see the foundations underground without digging up the whole site, show that the houses were built in parallel rows.
Like streets.
Almost all of them are oriented northeast to southwest. So yes, like streets.
So they had a grid, or at least a plan, a kind of Neolithic urban planning.
They had a concept of order. You couldn't just build your house wherever you wanted. You had to stay in line. And between these rows of houses, there were alleys or streets.
Streets in the Stone Age. That's still kind of amazing to me.
And there were functional spaces. In those alleys, we find evidence of specific activities. We find huge concentrations of flint flakes, which tells us that's where they were making stone tools.
So designated workspaces.
It wasn't just dead space. It was communal workspace, a sort of industrial zone.
And the houses themselves, are we still talking about those dugouts the 1893 guys thought they found?
No, and that's where modern archaeology completely corrected the record. The dugouts were likely just the subfloor or maybe cellars for storage. The actual houses were substantial, above-ground structures, timber-framed, rectangular, and the walls were made of wattle and daub.
Wattle and daub that's woven wood with mud, right?
Essentially. You weave branches between upright posts, that's the wattle, and then you plaster it with a mixture of clay, straw, and dung. That's the daub.
And that's sturdy?
When it dries, it's incredibly hard, almost like a natural concrete. It's windproof, waterproof, and a great insulator. Very warm.
So these were proper houses. Were they just one-room shacks?
No, not at all. We have a reconstruction of House 1 from Okolište that gives us a fantastic tour. These houses were anywhere from 4 to 10 meters long, and inside they were divided into rooms.
Rooms? Like a kitchen and a bedroom?
Functionally, yes. The evidence is really clear. The northeast room usually has the hearths and loom weights.
So that's the utility room. Cooking, making clothes?
Right. The central room was often for storage. We find storage pits for grain, keeping it dry and safe from mice. And the southwest room, that seems to be for sleeping and eating.
How can we know that?
Well, for one thing, it's generally cleaner, fewer work-related artifacts. And here's a detail I love. At a related site, Oberetanis, they found evidence of wooden board flooring in that sleeping area.
They had hardwood floors. You're kidding.
Planks, yes. Raised off the ground.
That is shockingly modern. I mean, nobody wants to sleep in the mud, but actually milling planks for a floor, that takes serious effort and foresight.
It speaks to a desire for comfort, for a certain standard of living. Imagine walking into one of these houses. It's warm. It smells like wood smoke and baking bread. They had these amazing kalod-shaped domed ovens inside the houses.
Wow.
You're walking on wooden floors. You're seeing multiple rooms for different activities. It's not a caveman existence. It's a home.
It sounds almost idyllic. But outside the home, things might not have been so cozy, because you mentioned this place was fortified.
Heavily, and this changes the vibe of the whole story. Okolište wasn't an open village. It was surrounded by a system of 4 parallel ditches.
4 ditches? Why 4? That seems like overkill.
That is the question. 1 ditch, okay, keeps the cows in or the wolves out. 2 ditches might be for drainage, but 4 concentric ditches, up to 4.5 meters wide and over a meter deep.
4.5 meters wide. That's wider than a lane on a highway.
It is. And they dug this with what? Antler picks and wooden shovels.
The labor investment is just staggering to think about.
It implies thousands and thousands of person hours.
Yeah.
You don't do that for fun. You don't do that unless you are very, very afraid of something.
Or someone.
Exactly. And behind the ditches, they had ramparts, earthen mounds, and palisades, which are walls of sharpened wooden stakes. This was a fortress.
So what does that suggest? That Okolište was some kind of capital?
It suggests a central role, for sure. Maybe it was a refuge for the entire valley population during times of trouble. Or maybe it was a place where the wealth was hoarded, and that wealth needed protecting.
And we know that trouble did come. This is the part of the research that felt a bit like a cold case file.
The massacre, or at least the mass death event. It's one of the darkest and most debated discoveries at the site.
So take us to the ditch. Which ditch was it?
It was the youngest ditch, the outermost one, dating to roughly 5,000 to 4,900 BC.
Okay.
This is just as the settlement is starting to shrink in size, which is a key detail. Archaeologists were excavating a section of it, expecting to find the usual stuff, broken pottery, animal bones.
Trash, basically. Ditches usually end up as trash cans.
Right. But instead, they found human remains.
Was it a burial site? A graveyard in the ditch?
That's the disturbing part. Neolithic people, like most people, had burial customs. They treated their dead with respect. These bodies were discarded.
Discarded. What does that mean in this context?
They found at least 14 individuals in just this one section of the ditch. The bones were disarticulated, which is a polite archaeological term for saying the bodies had fallen apart or been scattered. They weren't carefully laid out.
Oh, wow.
They were mixed in with the garbage ceramics, animal bones, household waste.
That's visceral. That's incredibly disrespectful.
It gets worse. 2 of the skeletons were found relatively intact, but their positions were telling. They were crouching or facing down. It looks like they were either thrown in shortly after death, or perhaps they died right there in the ditch, huddled over.
Do we know how they died? Is there evidence of violence?
The forensics are pretty clear on several of them. The skulls show perimortal fracture
The
patterns
perimortal meaning.
occurring at or near the time of death. They were hit with blunt objects, hard.
So someone bashed their heads in and threw them in the ditch with the garbage.
That is the leading theory, a massacre, a violent conflict that perhaps overwhelmed the defenses, the grim end to a siege.
Are there other theories?
There is a debate. Some researchers look at the lack of other warfare signs like burned houses or arrowheads everywhere and suggest it could have been an epidemic or a famine.
Okay, but how does that fit the skull fractures?
Well, in a time of social collapse, say a plague hits the city, normal burial customs break down. People are dying too fast. Bodies get dumped, the fractures. Maybe that's interpersonal violence in a starving, desperate city. People fighting over the last bit of food.
So either way, it paints a grim picture. Around 5000 BC, the good times at Okolište are ending violently.
The boom town is busting. But to understand what they were fighting over or what they lost, we need to look at just how rich their culture was before the fall. Because they weren't just digging ditches, they were masters of technology and art.
Let's talk about that technology. We mentioned the cattle earlier. You called them cattle kings.
The diet analysis is just overwhelmingly beef-centric.
Yeah.
88% of the animal bone fragments found at the site are from cattle.
88%? That seems impossibly high. Did they eat anything else?
They did. They were farmers. They grew emmer wheat, einkorn, lentils, broad beans. They gathered hazelnuts and wild grapes, so they had wine. But culturally, socially, it was all about the cow.
A diet of steak, bread, and wine sounds surprisingly modern.
It does, doesn't it? But the cattle provided something else too, something vital. Raw material for industry. This brings us to the bone tools.
Now, when I hear bone tools, I think of a caveman cracking a femur and using the sharp edge to cut something. You know, pretty basic stuff.
And that's the misconception. The bone technology in the Butmir and related Visoko cultures was incredibly sophisticated. It wasn't opportunistic, it was standardized. It was an industry.
Standardized how? What do you mean?
Well, look at their awls.
Yeah.
An awl is a pointed tool used for punching holes in leather or heavy fabric. If you're making clothes for 3,000 people, you need a lot of awls.
Right.
The archaeologists noticed that almost all the awls were made from the same specific bone,
Which bone was it?
the roe deer metapodial.
The roe deer metapodial. Okay, what is that and why that specific one?
It's the long bone in the foot of a roe deer.
Why that one? Why not a cow bone? They had plenty of cows.
That's the genius of it. Roe deer metapodials are incredibly dense and straight. They have a natural groove that makes them easy to split in a perfectly straight line. They are the ideal raw material for a long, sharp, needle-like tool. Cow bones are too thick, too irregular, too brittle in the wrong ways.
So they were engineers. They were selecting for material properties.
Precisely. They were hunting deer specifically for the tool parts. But the manufacturing process is what's really cool. The sources describe a chain operatoire.
Chain operatoire. That sounds fancy.
It's French for operational chain. It basically means an assembly line process. They didn't just hack at the bone until it was pointy. They had a set sequence of actions.
Like a recipe.
Exactly. Step 1, select the right bone. Step 2, split it down the central groove using a flint burren. Step 3, grind the tip at a specific angle against a sandstone block. Step 4, polish the whole thing until it's smooth.
So every all looked roughly the same, like they came out of a factory.
Yes. It shows specialization.
Yeah.
This wasn't something everyone did at home on a rainy Tuesday. There were likely people who were experts at this, craftspeople who spent their days making these tools.
And they did the same with stone, right? I read about House 6.
Ah, House 6, that's a great example of adaptive reuse. House 6 was a residential building that had been partially ruined. Maybe a fire, maybe it just got old.
No.
Instead of tearing it down or rebuilding it as a home, they turned it into a workshop.
A factory for stone tools.
Basically, the excavators found the floor was just covered in silex flint debris. Cores, flakes, half-finished arrowheads, broken blades. It was a dedicated space for knapping stone tools, separate from the living areas.
It feels very industrial. You have your residential zones, your industrial zones, your mass production of tools. But they weren't just grim industrialists. We have to talk about the art. Because if you Google Butmir culture, you don't see bone awls. You see the pottery.
The pottery is their brand. It's what made those Victorian scientists get on the train to Sarajevo. It's truly exceptional.
Describe it for someone who hasn't seen it.
It's stunning. The most famous style is this dark gray or black pottery. It's burnished, which means they polish the surface with a smooth stone before firing until it shines, almost like metal or black marble.
Okay, so it has this deep, glossy finish.
A beautiful luster. And the decoration. It's not painted on the surface, it's incised. They carved these intricate patterns into the wet clay before firing.
What kind of patterns?
Geometric motifs, but especially these incredible flowing spirals, S-shapes, C-shapes, complex ribbons of design that wrap around the vessel. And then, to make it pop, they would fill those carvings with a white paste or sometimes a red incrustation.
So you have this shiny black vase with these bright white or red spirals swirling all over it. That is a bold, high contrast look.
It's visually arresting. And the technical skill required to fire that pottery in a pith kiln without it cracking to get that consistent black color. It's high art. It shows a society with the surplus time and skill to value pure aesthetics.
But the pottery isn't the most controversial part of their artistic legacy. It's the figurines.
The Butmir figurines. Yes, this is where it gets really interesting.
They found 72 human figures at Butmir alone, and I feel like we have to address the elephant in the room. Whenever archaeologists find a statue of a woman from the Stone Age, especially if she has, let's say, curvy features, they slap a label on it.
The Venus label, or the fertility goddess.
Yeah.
It's almost a reflex.
Right. She has wide hips. She must be for fertility rituals. It feels a bit simplistic.
It is the great cliche of archaeology. And to be fair, many of the Butmir figures are what we call stetophagus.
Stetophagus, that's the technical term for it.
It just means having large buttocks and hips. But does it automatically mean goddess? The sources here argue that we need to be more careful. The fertility label is a bit lazy. It shuts down other possibilities.
Like, what else could they be, if not goddesses?
Well, think about how we use images of people today. Photos, dolls, action figures. They can represent ancestors. They can represent womanhood in a broader sense. Not just pregnancy, but authority, or different life stages like maiden, mother, crone.
That makes sense.
Some researchers even suggest they might be tokens of exchange representing brides in marriage alliances between different clans.
Oh, that's interesting, like a contract in clay form. We are united now. Here is the proof.
Exactly. A tangible representation of a social bond. But the body shapes aren't even the most unique part of the Butmir figures. It's the heads.
So-called alien heads. I've seen the pictures. They have these weird triangular faces, very stylized.
They do look a bit stylized, almost abstract. But what's fascinating is the variation. Unlike many Neolithic cultures where the face is just a blank oval or a simple beak for a nose, the Butmir heads have distinct features. Noses, chins, eyes, sometimes even hairstyles.
And this led the early archaeologists down a very weird path, didn't it, back in the 1890s?
It did. You have to remember the context. In the 1890s, race science was the trendy thing in academia. Scientists were obsessed with measuring skulls and categorizing people into racial types.
Right, phrenology and all that.
So Rudinsky and his colleagues looked at these clay heads and started projecting their own biases onto them.
What did they think they saw?
They claimed they saw distinct Negroid, Armenoid, and European features. They spun this whole theory that Butmir was this ancient melting pot where people from Africa and the Near East were mixing with local Europeans.
That seems like a huge stretch based on a lump of clay.
It was a massive projection of 19th century ideas onto 5000 BC clay. Today, we reject the idea that you can determine ethnicity from a small, stylized sculpture. But the fact that they could see those differences is actually a compliment to the artists.
How so?
It means the artists weren't just making a generic human symbol. They were observing real people. They noticed that one person had a prominent nose or that another had a round chin or a specific way of wearing their hair.
They were sculpting individuals, portraits.
It implies a sense of individuality and personhood that we often deny prehistoric people.
That's a really humanizing thought. These weren't faceless drones. They were people with distinct faces that their neighbors recognized in clay.
Exactly. They were a community of individuals.
So we have a society that is artistic, industrial, fortified, and dense. But were they isolated? Were they just hiding in their valley behind their 4 ditches?
Absolutely not. And this is the final piece of the Metropolis argument. You can't be a metropolis if you aren't connected. Okolište was plugged into the Neolithic internet.
And by internet, you mean complex, long-distance trade routes.
I do. And the data packets they were moving were salt and obsidian.
Let's start with the salt. Because looking at the map, there's no ocean in the Visoko Basin, no salt flats.
No. But to the north, about 60 kilometers away, there's a place called Tuzla.
Tuzla. The name sounds familiar.
The root tez is related to salt in Turkic languages, but the salt springs there have been exploited since time immemorial. Neolithic people needed salt. If you have thousands of cattle, you need salt for them. If you want to preserve all that beef for the winter, you need salt.
It's biological gold. It's a strategic resource.
It is. And at Butmir, archaeologists found special ceramic vessels with feet or stands that are specifically linked to the salt trade in other regions. They were used to evaporate brine. This strongly suggests they were importing salt, or maybe even controlling the trade of it through the region.
And what were they buying with that salt wealth? Or trading for?
High-tech gadgets of the day, specifically obsidian.
Volcanic glass.
The sharpest material known to prehistoric man. An obsidian blade can be flaked to an edge that is molecularly sharper than a modern surgical scalpel.
Wow!
But here's the catch. There are no volcanoes in Bosnia. Geologically, it shouldn't be there.
So where did it come from? Can we trace it?
We can't, using trace element analysis. Basically, you shoot X-rays or lasers at the stone to read its unique chemical signature, like a fingerprint. And the results are definitive. The obsidian in Okolište came from Lipari.
Lipari, isn't that a tiny island off the coast of Sicily?
It is. And some of it came from Melos,
Yeah.
in the Aegean Sea near Greece.
Wait, pause. To get a piece of rock from an island near Sicily to a valley in central Bosnia 7,000 years ago, that is a nightmare journey.
It's an odyssey. Think about the steps. You have to mine it on the volcano, put it on a dugout canoe, sail it across the Adriatic Sea, which is not a calm pond, land on the Dalmatian coast. And then
you have to get it inland.
you have to carry it over the Dinaric Alps, a massive mountain range, without roads, without horses or wheels.
So it's being passed hand to hand.
Hand to hand, pack to pack, likely traded from village to village. It traveled hundreds and hundreds of kilometers.
That implies a massive functioning supply chain. It's not just one guy on a heroic quest.
It proves they weren't isolated. They were part of a Mediterranean-wide network. We also found spondylus shells, those spiny oysters used for jewelry, that only come from the warm Aegean or Adriatic seas.
So let's put it all together.
Picture this. You walk into a house in Okolište. There is a man eating beef preserved with salt from the north, using a knife made of volcanic glass from a volcano in Italy, while his wife wears a necklace of shells from the Greek islands.
It's globalization. Stone Age style.
It is. It was a cosmopolitan, connected world.
Yeah.
Which makes the fact that it all fell apart even more haunting.
Right, because if you go to the Visoko Basin today, you don't see a 7,000-year-old city. You see cornfields and suburbs. Okolište is gone. And it didn't just vanish overnight, did it? It wasn't a Pompeii moment.
No, absolutely not. It was a slow strangulation. We can trace the decline in the archaeological layers. It's quite a sad story.
What's the timeline of the collapse?
So 5200 BC is the peak, 7.5 hectares. The boomtown is in full swing. By 5000 BC, around the time of that massacre we talked about in the ditch, it's already down to 5.6 hectares. They're rebuilding the fortifications, shrinking the perimeter.
Circling the wagons, pulling the defenses in tighter.
Exactly. And by 4500 BC, it's a shadow of its former self, just 1.2 hectares, a small village, really, and shortly after that, it's abandoned entirely. By the late phase of the culture, called Butmir III, the large central sites like Okolište and Obi III are empty.
Where did they go? Did they all die? Did another group come in and replace them?
They didn't vanish from the earth. They dispersed. The archaeological map shows that as the big city emptied out, dozens of small settlements popped up in the periphery of the basin and up in the surrounding hills.
So they fled the city for the suburbs. Or the woods.
They went back to the old way. Small, scattered hamlets of just a few families. A complete reversal of the trend.
The million-dollar question is why? Why leave a metropolis with hardwood floors and imported glass to go live in a hut in the woods? What went so wrong?
That is the debate. We don't have a smoking gun, but we have three main theories. Theory one, social stress.
Dunbar's number.
Exactly. The idea is that human brains are only wired to comfortably maintain stable social relationships with about 150 people. Okolište had maybe 3,000.
And they didn't have police. They didn't have courts. They didn't have a written constitution or laws.
Right, so when someone steals your cow or looks at your wife the wrong way, how do you resolve it? In a small village, everyone knows everyone, and the elders can talk it out. In a city, 3,000 strangers.
It turns into a feud.
And feuds turn into violence. The bodies in the ditch strongly suggest that the social fabric was tearing apart under the strain.
So it's just too crowded, too anonymous, too stressful to live there.
That's a strong possibility. I'm taking my family and leaving because I'm tired of being afraid of my neighbors.
Okay, what's theory two?
Ecological limits. They might have simply eaten the valley alive. You can only graze thousands of cattle and cut down thousands of trees for palisades and houses for so long before the environment starts to push back.
The soil gives up, deforestation.
Soil exhaustion,
Yeah.
wood depletion, erosion. If you have to walk 4 hours just to find firewood because you've cut down all the nearby trees, the city becomes unlivable. It's a classic case of overshoot and collapse.
And the third theory, this is the political one, right?
The failure of hierarchy, or rather the failure to develop one. The sources note something very interesting. Despite the size of the town, there's no clear evidence of a king or a chief.
How would we see that?
We don't see a palace. We don't see one house that is 10 times bigger than all the others.
Yeah.
We don't see a royal tomb full of gold and obsidian. The houses are all roughly the same size and quality.
So they were trying to run a city of 3,000 people as an egalitarian commune.
It seems so. And political scientists and anthropologists would argue that's almost impossible. Eventually, to manage that scale of population and resources, you need a hierarchy. You need a boss. You need taxes and administrators.
It's like a startup that grows too fast. You start with 5 friends in a garage, everyone is equal. Then you have 500 employees, but you still try to run it like 5 friends in a garage.
And the company collapses into chaos.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe Okolište failed because they refused to become a kingdom. They couldn't make that leap to the next level of social organization, and so they fell apart.
So 4,500 BC, the lights go out, the people scatter, the ditches fill up with mud, and the Butmir culture fades into history.
And it stays buried, completely forgotten, until our friends digging the agricultural college come along 6,500 years later.
So what does this all mean for us? Why should we care about, a failed experiment in Bosnia from 7,000 years ago?
I think failed experiment is the key phrase. But I want to challenge the word failed.
How so? They built a city and then they abandoned it. By any definition, isn't that a failure?
We are conditioned to think that history is a straight line of progress. It's a ladder. We go from caves to villages to towns to cities to megacities. Bigger is always better. Forward is always more complex.
Right. We assume that once you have a city, you never want to go back to the farm. That would be moving backwards.
But Mir shows us that isn't true. Humanity tried urbanization. They built the dense city. They had the trade, the art, the fortifications. They lived in it for a few centuries. And then they decided they didn't like it.
They voted with their feet. They opted out.
Exactly. So here is the provocative thought.
Great.
Maybe the collapse of Okolište wasn't a disaster. Maybe it was a solution. Maybe the people looked at the violence, the filth, the disease, the stress of city life and said, you know what? The small village was better.
De-urbanization as a conscious lifestyle choice.
It forces us to ask, is the city really the inevitable, superior endpoint of human evolution? Or is it just one option, a phase that we sometimes try and sometimes wisely grow out of?
That is a provocative thought. Just because we can build a megalopolis doesn't mean we should.
Yeah.
Or that it's the best way to live.
Precisely. Perhaps deurbanization wasn't a failure, but a strategic decision by the people to return to a more sustainable and maybe happier way of life.
On that note, I want to leave our listeners with a homework assignment. Go online and look up the Butmir heads. Look at those faces, because when you stare at them, you're looking at the people who made that choice. The people who built the city and the people who walked away from it.
They're definitely worth a look. The realism is haunting, and they really stick with you.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the lost metropolis of the Balkans. We'll catch you on the next one.
It was a pleasure. Goodbye.